This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to a new season of the award-winning Adventures in Compliance, the podcast where we look at the Sherlock Holmes short stories, movies, novels, and related material from the angle of compliance. In this season, we're going to take up the novels of Arthur Conan Doyle around Sherlock Holmes. Of course, there are 4 of them: A Study in Scarlet, Hound of the Baskervilles, perhaps the most famous Sherlock Holmes story, The Sign of 4, and The Valley of Fear. We're going to take a deep dive into each one of these novels and going to explore them over 4 podcasts. So it'll be over the next 4 months that we'll be taking a deep dive into this season. The novels in many ways fill in the gaps about how and why and what Holmes does, and they're really a delicious deep dive exploration of Sherlock Holmes, his methods, his friendship with Watson, more of the backstory on Watson. And if you have the opportunity, they're relatively short, about 100 to 125 pages per novel. I would urge you to read these novels in their entirety, select them in one work and do that. And I had a ton of fun reading them and preparing for this new season. There are some great stories in here, and I know you will enjoy them. And I hope you will enjoy this season of Adventures in Compliance really as much as I've enjoyed reading the stories. We're going to go begin with the story, the novel, A Study in Scarlet. And in this first episode, I'm going to go through the storyline and then take a look at an overview of some of the major ethical lessons from this story. As I mentioned, welcome to the newest season of Adventures in Compliance. Today we kick off this season exploring the novel A Study in Scarlet, where it all began. Published in 1887, this novel introduced the world to Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, forever changing detective fiction and setting the standard for logical deduction and investigative methods. So sit back and settle in as I talk you through a richly detailed summary of this fascinating tale. The novel opens with Dr. John Watson, recently discharged from his military service in Afghanistan due to injury and illness. Back in London, Watson faces uncertainty about his future. He soon meets an old acquaintance named Stanford, and during the conversation, Watson confides he needs or seeks affordable lodging. Stanford mentions another acquaintance, Sherlock Holmes, who is similarly looking for someone to share an apartment. Watson is intrigued by Stanford's vague description of Holmes' unusual scientific interests. They visit Holmes at his Bartholomew Hospital laboratory, where Watson observes Holmes conducting strange experiments. Holmes immediately impresses Watson by correctly deducing that Watson has recently served as an army doctor in Afghanistan, astonishing Watson and revealing Holmes' brilliant skills in deductive reasoning and observation. They soon agree to share rooms at the now famous address of 221B Baker Street. Watson gradually learns about Holmes' unique profession, a consulting detective who assists Scotland Yard and other clients when cases become too perplexing for conventional methods. Shortly thereafter, Scotland Yard inspectors Gregson and Lestrade seek Holmes' help regarding a mysterious and gruesome murder at a vacant house on the Brixton Road. The victim, identified as Enoch Drubber, an American visitor to London, is discovered without any physical wounds, or at least obvious physical wounds. Intriguingly, the German word Rache, R-A-C-H-E, meaning revenge, is scrawled in blood upon the wall nearby the body of the deceased. Holmes eagerly investigates the scene, meticulously observing minute details ignored by the official police investigation. He identifies several key clues overlooked by others: tracks of a cab, footprints, a ring dropped at the scene, and evidence suggesting the victim was poisoned. Holmes skillfully deduces the victim's height, age, habits, and manner of death, astonishing Watson and frustrating the Scotland Yard detectives. The case deepens when Gregson proudly announces he has arrested a suspect named Arthur Charpentier, whose sister had encountered the victim earlier. However, Holmes dismisses this theory and continues to follow his unique logic and the evidence trail. Shortly thereafter, a second man, Joseph Stangerson, a companion of Drebin, is found murdered in his hotel room, stabbed through the heart. Holmes swiftly reconstructs the connections, deducing a single perpetrator responsible for both crimes, exacting revenge for past wrongdoing. With strategic cunning, Holmes places an advertisement in the local paper about the lost ring to lure the killer into a trap. Holmes' plan succeeds brilliantly, and soon a cab driver named Jefferson Hope arrives at Baker Street under the pretext of claiming the ring. Holmes swiftly captures and handcuffs Hope, who calmly confesses to murdering both men. The first part of the story concludes dramatically with Holmes capturing the murderer through sheer, brilliant deductive reasoning. And part 2 provides the backstory, which we're going to take a deeper dive into in a later episode. And it happens in the American West near Salt Lake City. And it details the complex history which inspired Hope's quest for revenge. John Ferrier and a young girl named Lucy are rescued from certain death in the desert by a caravan of Mormon pioneers heading west. The Mormons agree to save them only if Ferrier and Lucy convert to their faith. Grateful for their survival, Ferrier agrees. In the years following, Ferrier prospers greatly within this community, becomes wealthy and respected. Lucy grows into a beautiful and admired young woman. A conflict arises when Mormon elders command Lucy to marry within the faith, offering him 2 suitors, Enoch Drebber and Joseph Stangerson, both prominent Mormons. However, Lucy is secretly in love with Jefferson Hope, a young hunter and adventurer who respects Ferrier and has no interest in the Mormon Church. Ferrier, appalled by the elders' coercion, arranges to flee Utah with Lucy and Hope to escape the forced marriage and oppressive church practices. However, their escape is tragically foiled. While Hope is preparing for their departure, Ferrier is murdered by church adherents and Lucy is forcibly married to Drebber. Lucy soon dies, heartbroken and ill, following their forced marriage, further fueling Hope's vow revenge against both men responsible for whom he believes destroying the woman he loved and deeply respected. Hope dedicates his entire life to tracking down Drebber and Stangerson across America and eventually Europe. Hope's obsession with justice for Lucy's cruel fate brings him to London, where he finally corners the 2 men. In the first murder, Hope forces Drebber to choose between identical pills, one poisoned and one harmless, thus leaving the outcome to fate. Drebber dies from the poison, with Hope writing Rache on the wall to mislead authorities. Soon thereafter, Hope encounters and kills Stangerson during an attempt to flee the United Kingdom. These events directly reconnect to the investigation Holmes undertook earlier in the book. After Hope is arrested, Scotland Yard and the public initially struggle to comprehend the depth and complexity behind the crimes. Holmes succinctly recounts the entire narrative, demonstrating his peerless investigative skills. Unfortunately, Hope dies of an aneurysm shortly after his arrest, preventing a formal trial. The novel concludes with Holmes indifferent to public praise, satisfied instead with the intellectual satisfaction of solving this complex case. Watson, deeply impressed, resolves to record Holmes' exploits for future generations. In today's episode, I want to look at 5 lessons learned for compliance professionals around ethics and compliance. Number 1, the danger of institutional abuse of power. Compliance professionals can draw important lessons from the misuse of authority displayed by Mormon elders. Unchecked authority can rapidly lead to coercion, abuse, and corruption. A strong compliance program promotes oversight, transparency, and accountability to prevent similar abuses. Professionals should ensure robust internal controls and reporting channels to guard against ethical deterioration in their organizations. Number 2, justice must be structured and objective. The actions of Jefferson Hope in seeking revenge spotlight the ethical pitfalls of vigilantism, acting on personal grievances instead of allowing structured judicial process to operate. Similarly, Corporate compliance must emphasize objective and standardized investigative processes rather than subjective and emotionally driven actors. Remember, the Department of Justice says compliance is the holder of institutional justice and institutional fairness in an organization. Compliance officers must always ensure investigations are based on the impartiality of facts, not personal biases or vendettas. Number 3, a root cause analysis is essential. Holmes' investigative method is a masterclass in root cause analysis. Instead of looking solely at the superficial evidence, he traces crimes back to their underlying historical and personal origins. Compliance officers should similarly embrace root cause analysis techniques in their compliance investigations, looking beyond immediate circumstances to systemic or structural weaknesses that may perpetuate the unethical behavior. Number 4, importance of due diligence and documentation. Sherlock Holmes underscores the importance of meticulous documentation and comprehensive due diligence when conducting an investigation. His careful collection of evidence and methodical approach allow him to unravel a complex narrative. Likewise, compliance programs must systemically document their investigative efforts, clearly outlining the steps taken, evidence gathered, and rationale for the decisions to maintain transparency and integrity. Number 5, transparency and communication. Throughout A Study in Scarlet, Holmes consistently collaborates and communicates his methods and findings clearly with Watson and the Scotland Yard detectives. In the compliance context, clear, concise, and transparent communications about expectations, policies, and processes are equally critical. Compliance professionals should proactively communicate compliance requirements, investigative procedures, and ethical standards to foster an organizational culture of transparency and trust. Sherlock Holmes' adventure in A Study in Scarlet may be a thrilling detective narrative on the surface, but underneath it reveals powerful ethical principles that resonate deeply with the responsibilities and priorities of corporate compliance professionals in 2025. Thank you for joining me, and remember, maintaining integrity is about vigilance, clarity, and objectivity in what we do as compliance professionals. This concludes our initial look into the Sherlock Holmes novel, A Study in Scarlet. As I mentioned at the start, I hope you will take the time to read this novel. It's a great detective novel, lots of lessons learned for the compliance professional, and lots to say about compliance programs and ethics in an organization. The award-winning podcast, Adventures in Compliance, is a special production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Have you ever thought about starting a podcast? Would you like to start a podcast? In 2025, I think it would be a great time for you to start a podcast, and you can post it on the Compliance Podcast Network, the only podcast network in compliance and by far one of the most popular B2B podcast network around. So if you'd like more information on starting a podcast, please give me a shout. You can reach me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. I hope you will join me again next week, where I take a deep dive into specifically some of the investigative tools, tactics, and strategies used by Sherlock Holmes in A Study in Scarlet. They really do provide some great examples of how compliance professionals can use the methods of Sherlock Holmes in their compliance programs today. I know you will enjoy next week's episode, get a lot out of it, and perhaps even are able to incorporate some of Holmes' tactics, strategies, tools, and methods into your compliance program in 2025. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to visiting with you again next week.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day, one actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet, every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. Only on the Compliance Podcast Network, available wherever you listen to podcasts.